everyone. Welcome to another episode of Yale College Voices, where we delve into the fascinating stories and backgrounds of our Yale College staff. And today I'm so happy to welcome Kripa Bhagat, who is part of the Richard U. Light Fellowship um, program here at Yale College. So welcome, Kripa.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to finally get you here. As you know, we had some scheduling changes, and I'm so happy, that you were able to make it. And thank you so much for being so flexible.
Sure.
So Kripa, I'm going to read your bio, and
Okay.
then we'll, just have a conversation.
Sure.
So Kripa Bhagat helps manage and advise on the Richard U. Light Fellowship's portfolio of China and Korea programs. Growing up in a multilingual environment, Kripa learned the importance of cross-cultural communication at a young age and started her journey as a linguist with the formal study of Spanish, Italian, and Chinese. She participated in Startalk summer Chinese language immersion programs as a high school student and is also a proud alumna of Middlebury CV Star School in Beijing. She is passionate about helping students meet their linguistic goals and has demonstrated this commitment as an education ambassador for the Aimson Year in China program in Yiwu, China, as a Spanish language residential advisor and administrator at Middlebury affiliated youth summer programs, and as resident director for the National Security Language Initiative for Youth program in Kaohsiung, Taiwan. She loves learning from her students and seeing how they apply their linguistic skills to their areas of interest. Kripa also holds a master's in Chinese linguistics from the University of Hawaii and a bachelor's in East Asian studies from Barnard College. In her free time, Kripa enjoys swimming, dancing, arts and crafts, and trying new recipes. So I'm fascinated, and thank you so much again for coming, Kripa.
Of course.
And
It's exciting to be here. It's kind of surreal to hear someone read your bio in front of you. So
really,
it's a good reminder of
right?
what has brought me here. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And so, yeah, I'd love to start off with just, if you don't mind sharing some of your early years. You mentioned, before we got started that you actually came from Long Island.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious if you don't mind sharing a little bit more about yourself, like where you grew up and you know,
Sure.
leading into your college years. So we'll talk about that first.
Yeah. So like you said, I grew up on Long
Mhm.
Island. My parents immigrated from India
Ah,
in the 80s. And so a lot of my growing up was navigating Indian Americanness
mhm,
in the
mhm,
United States. And I grew up in a relatively diverse community, a lot of Asian Americans. And so I was able to kind of learn about different cultures and
mhm,
languages and kind of express my own culture within that space.
mhm,
And I think that really contributed to who I became and who I continue to become.
mhm.
Um, and yeah, so that's kind of the spiel on
The spiel.
my growing up. Yeah.
Nice. And so what was it like? Because it mentioned, as we mentioned in your bio, like at an early age you were bilingual, right? Or
Yeah, I think it's a complicated thing to ask heritage learners about their
really?
level of language, and
Mhm,
there's plenty of people who are doing research about
mhm,
like heritage language learner identity, but for me it was more about exposure, but I had
mm,
this complicated relationship with it, and I think a lot of people do,
mhm,
where you don't feel like it's perfect because it's
mhm,
not your parents' way of speaking,
mhm,
and you're learning it from someone who left, the country in a specific time period, and language
mm,
changes. So,
mhm,
so I can understand, but I'm not as confident speaking. But having said that, I think just being exposed to that makes you really comfortable with not understanding what someone is saying.
mhm,
So my my dad's mother tongue is Marathi. It's something I was less exposed to just because the
okay,
community around me wasn't speaking it as much.
okay,
And so I couldn't communicate as well with that side of the family,
okay.
and I probably still can't, but it makes you kind of value, um, communication in other ways besides
Mm,
language. So, helping someone do something, you
yeah,
don't need a to be able to communicate to do that.
right.
And, my aunts and my grandmother at the time would like to feed us a lot, and
Mhm.
that's something that transcends language.
Right, right.
So I think it was helpful for me, and sometimes frustrating because I didn't reach the perfection that I would like to, and something I continue to work towards,
Mhm.
but it also made me appreciate the other things that you can use to communicate with people.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So it sounds like food brought your family
Yeah.
together
Uh-huh.
frequently. Was it like, did you have big family dinners
Yeah.
and things like that?
We tried Thanksgiving actually
Mm,
ended up being something just because we all have the day off, and
right, right.
so that turned out to be a time where we could eat together,
Mhm,
those of us who are in the States,
mhm.
and so we sort of started putting together fusion meals, so,
Oh,
like,
really?
our Thanksgiving table would have, um, like, samosas, definitely, but
Mhm,
also sometimes turkey and
mhm,
corn but
mhm.
also, like, bataganusha, like, there it was
Oh,
just an
wow.
interesting
Combination.
combination, um, and I loved it. I
Yeah.
mean, Thanksgiving as a holiday aside, I
Mhm,
think that
mhm,
just being able to be together on
mhm.
any occasion and share food, sign me up. If
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
food, I'm there.
Really?
Yeah.
I know, and it's funny when you say it has come up in other episodes
Yeah,
where,
right.
whether it's family or even just being here on campus, like, the way to get people together is to say, "Oh, there's food.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, count me in. Is there lunch? Yes."
Yeah, it's a
You know?
big motivator.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's awesome, and so it sounds like, just from your background growing up that, there early on that you had some sort of interest in cross-cultural
Yeah.
communication and linguistics. So were there certain I know you mentioned your grandmother
Mhm.
and your parents. Were there other individuals that kind of influenced your interest?
Yeah, so I had great teachers
Really?
at my public high school
Mhm.
in on Long Island. They had a strong language department, and actually at the time, they didn't offer Chinese
Oh, okay.
as an option. I went to
Mhm.
high school at a time where that was burgeoning in the
Mhm.
United States, right?
Mhm.
Obama had the 10,000 Strong
Mm.
initiative. They were really
Mhm.
trying to promote exchange between the US and China.
Mhm.
And so when I started studying languages, which was in 6th grade,
Oh, wow.
they had an option Spanish, Italian, French.
Mhm.
So I picked Spanish because it seemed the most
Right,
practical
right,
and everybody else, I don't know.
right.
And then I enjoyed it. It
Mhm.
was fun to me. And I had the opportunity to pick an elective in 10th grade. So I was
Mhm.
like, you know what? Let me try Italian
Mhm.
because there were fewer people in it than
Really?
French. And it turned out to be interesting to me and it's similar to Spanish. And I
Mhm.
thought, okay, I want to try something different.
Mhm. Mhm.
What can I try? And then at the time, they had added Chinese for the 6th graders when I was in 8th grade. So when
Wow.
I was in 11th grade, then those students were in 9th grade and they were
Mhm.
coming in. So I was like, great, how can I catch up?
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
So I went into the language department chair's office, Dr. Ramirez, who's
Mhm.
just a great person that I still keep in touch with sometimes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I said, I would like to study Chinese. How
Mhm.
can I do that?
Mhm.
And she said, okay, there's a summer program you can apply to. It's a scholarship
Really?
program, US government funded, the Startalk program.
Wow.
Apply
Mhm.
and see what happens. And I did, and I
Mhm.
got in and I went, and it was a day camp immersion. So what that means
Wow.
is you were agreeing not to speak English for the duration of the
Oh
day.
my goodness.
So I walk in, never spoke Chinese before. I've
Yeah.
heard it, but
Uh-huh.
I mean, I really didn't know anything besides ni hao, right?
Right.
And people are talking at me, and I was like,
Like, you had no
Nope."
idea.
But I had great teachers at the Star
Oh
Talk
my
program
goodness.
who were very willing to catch me up, and then
Mhm.
I joined the high school,
Wow.
program, and because I was older, I was actually the first person to graduate from my high school having studied Chinese there, so it was
That's so
actually
amazing.
really exciting for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had not heard of the program until
Yeah.
I read your bio. That's amazing. And there's nothing like forcing you, total immersion,
Yeah.
forcing you to speak the language. Um, and so what was that like? Like, so did they, I know you said it was a day camp, but was it like, you're just sitting in a room or what kind of environment was it? Like, how did they set it up?
Yeah, so you have asked me a question that could talk for hours
Yeah.
about because immersion language learning is
Mhm.
something that I'm really passionate about, and
Really?
it's kind of the center of my story, and
Yeah.
you'll kind of hear why. But at the time, that was my first exposure to
Okay.
it, except in real life,
Right.
with my family, and
Right.
where for if you're speaking to someone who doesn't speak English, you
Mhm.
have to.
Mhm.
In the case of immersion programs, you're simulating being in a country, right?
Yeah.
Because these people speak English. Your instructors speak English because you're in
Mhm.
the United States. So it's
Mhm.
a self-selective group who's
Mhm.
choosing to only speak in the language.
Wow.
And I'm sure we didn't always because we were in
Right.
high school, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
as in my memory, we did.
Yeah.
And what's cool about that is that you end up bonding with the people in your
Mm.
classroom because you
Mhm.
have to find a way to communicate with each other that's not just language. So
Mm.
that could be acting out, that could
Mhm.
be and so we did a lot of storytelling and talent
Wow.
shows and
Really?
singing. Yeah, and it was across several levels. So there were
Mhm.
some students who came in and they had a little bit of Chinese, so they could
Mhm.
do some plays. And of
Yeah.
course, it's like, what do you eat? I
Mhm.
eat fish. Like, it's
Yeah.
not super
Like
complicated.
basic,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. But it's fun, and
Yeah.
that's what motivates you to keep going. And
Mhm.
then there were definitely cultural components that might not have always been in
Mhm.
Chinese now that I'm thinking about it, but, paper cutting,
Mhm.
calligraphy. We did
Wow.
gong fu, which was so cool. And
Mhm.
then at the end, I did it for 2 summers,
Mhm.
so I can't remember which summer it was, but we did a play, Journey
Mhm.
to the West, which is a very
Wow.
famous
Mhm.
mythological story.
Mhm.
And, and of course, the script was provided to us. We didn't write the script, but it was cool because it was part of
Mhm.
this, like, cultural linguistic immersion
Yeah.
plan, and I went on to do immersion programs and work for immersion programs after that.
Really?
Yeah.
That is so cool. I love that.
Yeah.
It reminds me, it's funny, hearing your story. Years ago, so my older son is now almost 21, but when he was in, it might have been 7th or 8th grade, I chaperoned a trip to Quebec City because he was taking French. And it was, the idea was to be that immersion, like,
Right.
only on the trip, speak French, that's it.
Mhm.
It was so funny. So when I went on the trip, because I had only taken Spanish,
Right.
so, and I asked his teacher, like, "You're gonna have to help me because I don't know French at all. I can, how certain words you can
Yeah, right.
sort of figure out what they mean and
Yeah.
things like that. But it was, it was so cool because the town people were French speaking and ordering food and
Yep.
talking to the hotel staff and things like that. It was really cool. So
Yeah.
and
I think also that makes people afraid too,
yeah,
right? This idea of not being able to communicate and not being able to understand. I think it
yeah,
deters people
hmm,
from going to places sometimes too. But I think being able to sit with that discomfort is also kind of a skill that is
yeah,
important, especially in the world that we live
yeah,
in today.
yeah, absolutely. Because like you said, you have to find other ways to communicate with people, or
Yeah.
and then well, for me it was following body
Hmm.
language, facial expressions, or hand motions.
Right.
Um, because, even for me, amongst the students, I couldn't speak French. So
Right.
so I'm like, "How do you say?"
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so
That's
you
so
have to find
cool.
other ways to connect,
Uh huh.
and that's what was, so cool for me, like, on the trip, just learning, even though I didn't speak the language, but just learning how to communicate on a different level, basically, and
Right.
so that is so interesting. So what, you mentioned that you did other programs. So after you did the Startalk program, where did you go from there?
So I graduated high school, went to
Mhm,
college,
mhm,
and in the summers, I worked for a language immersion summer camp for
mhm,
high school students, actually middle school and high school.
mhm.
And I worked I ended up working at that program for 7 summers, 8 summers,
Oh, wow.
all throughout college and then a little bit afterwards. And
Mhm,
I worked as a program assistant, an RA,
mhm,
dorm head, office manager, summer site manager. So I
mhm.
kind of saw it from all
Yeah.
perspectives. And that was a program where students would come to summer camp,
Mhm.
agree to only speak in the
Really?
language,
That's so
and
cool.
it was cool. And at the time, at the very beginning, they would give in their phones,
Oh,
like total
wow.
immersion,
Yeah, no
which
Google
was no
Translate or
Google
any.
Translate, no, and part of it is also then you deal with homesickness
Yeah.
and language
Wow.
dependency. So it was an interesting experience, and I
Yeah.
met some of the coolest people through that,
Really?
and then a lot of them are still my friends,
Mhm.
and my partner, I met
Yeah.
him through that
Aw,
working there too, so that's why I
really?
say it's kind of a central piece of my life,
Yeah, that's so cool.
yeah, so basically as an RA, what we
Mhm.
would do is schedule programming in the morning, like
Mhm.
an assembly where we would do a skit or
Uh-huh.
teach some kind of theme of the day.
Mhm.
The students would go to class, so there were teachers on staff
Mhm.
who would teach kind of more formal language class, and
Yeah.
then afterwards we would run activities,
Mhm.
volleyball, cloud
Mhm.
watching, board games, all
Mhm.
in Spanish
Oh,
or,
wow.
whatever language. We had
Mhm.
a couple of languages at the campus.
Mhm.
And then at night we would do more activities. They go to
Mhm.
sleep. We do it all again.
Oh, wow, that is
And
so cool.
yeah, so it doesn't run anymore, unfortunately, but
Oh,
there are
really?
similar things like it out
Okay.
there. And so yeah, I mean, I think it's hard now to ask a student to give in their phone,
Yeah, yeah.
right? I think that is
Yeah, they're
like,
not parting with.
yeah, it's a different world we live in, and
Yeah.
also the pandemic
Right,
impacted that.
right.
But yeah, so it's cool to be able to watch someone learn in that environment.
Mhm.
And you really need to build a environment of safety and
Mm.
feeling comfortable making mistakes because
Yeah.
it is a fake immersion
Right, right.
experience that
Yeah.
it's not in country, and that those two things are different.
Mhm.
So it was just it's inspiring to watch young people try to learn, and then
Yeah.
they learn so quickly most of the time, especially if
Yeah.
you're doing class and immersion. That's
Mhm.
why I'm in the work that I do now too.
Mhm.
So so it kind of keeps you motivated as a language learner too to watch other
Yeah.
people learning.
Oh, that is so cool. And what, you know, as you were talking about creating this, environment of immersion, it just made me think about, um, like in a real life scenario where, uh, where someone might feel isolated
Mhm. Yeah.
if they don't speak the language. And like, have you ever been in a situation where, or maybe even helped a student where they just felt like so isolated because
Yeah.
they didn't understand the language or.
So, when I studied abroad, the
Mhm.
first night so I lived with a local roommate who ended up being so amazing for me
Oh,
and
really?
really helped me live in
Mhm.
China. But,
Mhm.
the first night I got there and she said something to me, I don't even remember because I
Mhm.
didn't understand her.
Mhm.
I had taken Chinese at that point for 2 years in high school
Mhm.
and 2.5 years in college. So I was
Wow.
like, "Oh, I'm gonna be
Mhm. Yeah,
golden."
you're great, yeah.
Got there, did not understand, and cried that first
Aw.
night. I remember crying silently in
Oh,
my
no.
in my bed because I was just like, "Oh my gosh, what this is so
Really?
scary." But
Yeah.
I was so confident up
Yeah.
until that point that I didn't stop to think like, "This is actually a huge thing that I'm doing." And I
Yeah.
think it happens to a lot of people.
Mm.
And it's part of culture shock to a certain extent, but
Mhm.
I've talked to many students who feel this way,
Mm.
who especially those who go for an academic year, especially
Mhm.
those at Yale who are leaving their normal
Yeah.
graduation year, so to
Mhm.
speak, and coming back with a different cohort of students,
Mhm.
they feel afraid. And at the
Really?
beginning, it is really scary
Mhm.
to say, what if a lot of times they ask, what if um, my friendships change? What if
Yeah.
my relationships change? But most of the time,
Mhm.
they come back and they say, "This has made me better positioned to
Mm.
approach my education.
Really?
I have stayed in touch with the people I wanna stay in touch with, and the other
Mhm.
people it's okay." And
Mhm.
that's what happened to me too, right? I
Mhm.
came back and I really was like, "Oh, I'm a more independent person. I can
Mhm.
think in a different way."
Yeah.
So I think it is definitely isolating and
Yeah.
scary, and I also think that that is part of the experience. Now,
Mhm.
obviously, there are other situations in which isolation is concerning,
Right.
and I believe that people should seek support for that.
Right.
But
Right.
but I think there's a fine line between those two things,
Yeah.
right? And even being able to seek support mental health or otherwise abroad
Mhm.
is such a huge skill and such a huge hurdle
Mhm.
that empowers so many students and people that I think that if you're prepared to go abroad and you know what to expect, then
Mhm.
you are going to make the most out of it, even
Mhm.
if you're struggling. And
Wow.
happened to me too. Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. Is I've always I did not have an opportunity to
Mhm.
study abroad, but I've always been amazed. Um, and to be honest, one reason that I never pursued it when I was in college was like that fear of
Yeah.
just yeah, like what if you get there and you
Yeah.
don't know anyone, you don't know the language, and
100%. Yeah.
you need something basic and you don't know how to communicate it or
Yeah.
get it or
Yeah.
you know, like years ago I worked for a nonprofit that was a international nonprofit and even in we traveled to Nicaragua at one point, and same thing, I took Spanish for years, right? And and I'm embarrassed to say, like, my teacher, Mrs. Muniz, I'll never forget her, she'd be so upset with me if she knew that I had trouble communicating,
Yeah.
like, same thing, like, I could listen and understand certain things, but trying to speak it was a whole other
Yeah.
a whole other thing. And, there were certain situations, like, when we were crossing, the border from Costa Rica into Nicaragua,
Mhm.
and, um, luckily, we had a staff person who was fluent spoke Spanish fluently, but, um, at one point, they took my manager's passport, and we
Mhm.
couldn't figure out why because we we were trying to communicate, like, "What is happening?"
Yep.
Like, "What's going on?"
Yeah.
Um and everything was fine, but it was a scary situation because
Mhm.
you're when you're realizing like, okay, I'm foreign to this area and
Yeah.
I don't know what's happening or who to talk to or how to resolve this without making people angry or
100%.
whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it was a scary feeling to just feel like, okay, like we're on our own right now, and so yeah, it was
What ended up happening?
well, so what was interesting is so they I know I have to tell the story, right? They took my manager's passport and what's funny, I was thinking about this recently with a friend of mine because I worked in IT. We were very young, I was probably maybe about 24 or so.
Uh-huh.
And, shout out to this organization because they hired us. We sort of led IT for the organization in the headquarters, and my manager wasn't that much older than me, and I'm thinking these kids are running IT for this international organization, you know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
And but it was an amazing experience because they really I don't know, they trusted us, so it
Yeah.
was great, and so, yeah, we were crossing this border, they took his passport, and our colleague who spoke fluent Spanish, he because at first we were like, "What is happening?" Um, and he's like, "Calm, stay
Take
calm,
a deep breath. Uh-huh.
relax, I'm gonna talk to them." And it turned out, I guess when they saw people from the United States, that sometimes they required an extra fee
Uh-huh.
to cross the border, and they wanted that extra fee, and once we paid it, "Here's your passport," and
Interesting.
and they let us
Yeah.
go. Um, but it was scary
Right.
because how I don't know how to react in this situation or what else were we
Right.
supposed to do? Um, but again, just like you were saying, it's not just the language, it was the staying calm and
Yeah.
being, facial expression, body
Mhm.
language, everything
Yeah.
kind of kept things, you know, running smoothly.
There you go. Yeah, that's
And
such a great example. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and it was a great experience though. Even just, we I'm going on and on in this story, but we drove from Costa Rica to Nicaragua,
Ah, okay.
and which is beautiful, by the way. It was like a beautiful scenic route, and just learning the culture and
Mhm.
and again feeling like I know Spanish, but I don't know Spanish, and
Yeah.
yeah, it was a great experience, and like you said, it can feel isolating, but you have to I almost feel like you have to figure out how to survive and
Yeah.
kinda dig deep for, the translation, and back then, we didn't have Google Translate or
Right,
anything
right.
like that,
Yeah.
but it was a great experience, but it can be, uh, stressful and, scary.
Yeah.
Scary, so I'm wondering, if you could share more about, like, other memorable experiences you had, throughout your college years, like, um, was was there a particular mentor that stood out for you or experience that comes to mind when you did, some of the study abroad programs?
So, yes.
Yeah.
So when I studied abroad, I there were a lot of people on campus who
Mhm,
really supported me, but actually when I studied abroad, the director of the program
mhm,
was someone who was a big resource for me, and he's still there. Well, I think he's still there.
mhm,
And so for me, that program, so I did a Middlebury immersion program. That one is like no training
intense.
wheels. You sign a
Really?
language pledge, you're speaking in Chinese.
Really?
Yeah, and that's what I wanted
Yeah,
because I had these other experiences and
okay,
I heard about Middlebury, so I wanted to do it.
okay.
Um, there were 6 of us on the program.
Mhm,
Each of us had a local roommate that we
mhm,
lived with, and so I think in that experience, I got to be exposed to some of the, Great Wall of China and the
mhm.
biggest hits that you
Yeah,
think
yeah.
of when you think of China.
Mhm,
Um, but also that was my first experience in
mhm,
China. I really didn't know what to expect, and what's funny about it is that I had been to India growing up because my parents are from there and I have a
mhm,
lot of relatives there,
mhm.
and for whatever reason, I was not expecting them to be as similar as
Mm.
they are, and it makes a lot of sense when you think about them historically and
Mhm,
and environmentally,
mhm.
but I just didn't expect that, and so
Yeah,
when I
yeah.
was there, I thought, "Oh, I actually maybe can do this a little bit," because
Mhm.
it's, crossing the street.
Right,
At the
right.
time, there was I don't know what it looks like now because it's been a while for me,
Mhm,
um, but I remember when I was young and crossing the street in front of where my grandma lived, there was no crosswalk, right? So you just
mhm,
have to kinda go
mm.
for it.
Just go over yeah.
And that was terrifying
Scary,
as an
yeah.
American kid or a kid who grew
Yeah,
up in America. And
yeah.
then, same thing
Mhm,
near China, like in near the campus that I
mhm.
was studying at. So things like that.
Yeah.
And then, being a young Indian American woman,
Mhm.
I stood out, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that was something I expected because I
Mhm,
had read about it and it was fine. But
mhm,
I just remember this one story that I like to tell students who
mhm,
are going abroad now too,
mhm,
that, I went to a different city with my 2 of my classmates,
mhm,
and this woman came up to me and she said, "Photo?" And I
mhm,
thought she was asking me to take a photo of her with
mhm.
this gentleman that she was with, so I was like, "Sure."
Yeah, yeah.
Weird choice, but,
Yeah.
like, sure. And I reached my hand out, and
Mhm.
she stood next to me, and the
Oh,
man was taking the photo of us.
about
And I was like, "Oh." But then what do you do in that
Right,
situation,
right.
right? So I just smiled, and
Yeah.
she held my hand
Aw.
in the picture, and then
Mhm.
she was like, "Thank you," and they
And they're
left, and
like
I was like, "What
like, "What was
just
that about?"
happened?"
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was so foreign to me, but,
Right.
and I had a lot of experiences like that where people would look at me
Mhm.
or be kind of curious,
Yeah.
which in the United States would be kind of a weird
Right.
thing to happen to you, but
Yeah.
there I took it almost as like a kind of curiosity and a kind of
Mhm.
exposure that
Mhm.
could contribute to this individual
Yeah.
person's experience and understanding of the world.
Right, right.
Um, so I had a lot of those types of experiences
Really.
and just also a lot of delicious food
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
of course, that's the
That's
piece
your favorite,
yeah,
right?
that's the piece that I remember the most, but, um yeah, I was so fortunate to have a group of people,
Mhm.
also just classmates who were really supportive. I think
Mhm.
when you have colleagues, classmates, people who are you work with every single day who are
Yeah.
patient and
Mhm.
kind and understanding
Mhm.
really goes a long way.
Yeah.
And that's how I learned Chinese, honestly.
Wow, that is so awesome, and, I'm glad you you made a great point in terms of, if something like that happened here and
Yeah.
how someone may react,
Yeah.
they may even feel offended in
Yeah.
some way,
Yeah.
and the fact that you, didn't react that way with her, and maybe it who knows, but maybe it changed how she
Maybe. Yeah.
perceived you, or maybe the next time that she see someone like you that
Yeah.
she may react a different way,
Right. Right.
and hopefully it made that lasting impression.
Yeah. I like to think that that's the function
Yeah.
of what the work that we do.
Mhm.
I also just remember, just a side note, that my roommate, when I had asked her something along the lines of like, "What did you expect
Yeah.
when you signed up for this and
Right,
to getting
right.
an American roommate?"
Mhm.
And she said, "Well, when I interviewed for it, because they had kind of their own interview process,
Mhm.
they asked me what do you hope of your American roommate?" And
Mhm.
she told me, she said that she doesn't have a gun
Oh my gosh.
and that she doesn't do drugs
Oh my
because
gosh.
they watch television and movies and that and in China also there's like a certain
Mhm.
perception of America,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
But it was just interesting to me because it was so, first of
Far
all,
far
just
from who you are,
far
right?
from who I was, but also far from what I would have said in her
Yeah.
position,
Yeah.
knowing what I know.
Right.
So I guess it
So
made me think
interesting.
also about how we perceive each other and like how do you view another human being when they walk into
Right.
the room?
Absolutely. And that's such a great point because this actually came up in conversation recently for me. Like it happens here where people make assumptions
Yeah.
about like where do you live in Connecticut
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that type of thing, and
Yeah.
they automatically think, oh, if you live in this area, it must mean you're this kind of person, and
Right.
it's like, no, I grew up here. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I
Yeah.
grew up here, and see, I'm I'm not this kind of person, and
Right.
it's sad that it happens, but
Yeah.
but it's also great when you can, sort of dispel the myth,
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
and change someone's whole mindset
Yeah.
of, yeah, that this is not how Americans are. This is not,
Right.
um, that is awesome. So I had other questions about which you kind of answered in terms of, you know, what sort of led, or motivated you to pursue this in your undergraduate studies. And I'm curious, were there certain experiences like your time as a resident director?
Mhm.
Can you share some things about that?
Yeah, so the RD position
Mhm.
in any study abroad program is like being like a guardian and
Mhm.
also a like the disciplinary
Oh.
arm and also the only kind of American staff member
Mhm.
for students to relate to
Mhm.
and programming and
Mhm.
planning. So there's a lot of aspects to that position, and I think anyone who has had that
Mhm.
job, it's similar to like a dorm parent
Ah.
or kind of a residential
Mhm.
staff member. I worked with 2 cohorts of students throughout the academic year.
Mhm.
They all lived in host families,
Mhm.
and that was honestly the best part about that job,
Really?
is seeing how they bonded with their host
Oh,
families
nice. Yeah.
across 10 months and how the things they were nervous about changed over time
Right.
and how they opened up to their host families.
Mhm.
I think it depends on the group of students you have.
Mhm.
That was also my first time in Taiwan,
Mhm.
showing up to do that job.
Really?
Yeah, and it's just a beautiful place, so welcoming and warm,
Really?
and people are kind, and the south of Taiwan is a slower pace than
Mhm.
I would say a lot of
Really?
bigger cities are, yeah. So,
Interesting.
it was just amazing.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of host families, I think, so each family had their own kind of routine
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
quirks,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I just remember this one student I had who's very flexible.
Mhm.
His host family was very eco-friendly. I love them.
Oh,
They're people
yeah.
who I still keep in touch with
Yeah.
today. Anyway, so they would use smaller towels,
Oh, yeah.
and where we use these big bath
Right,
towels
right.
in the United States. And so he told me this. I had weekly check-ins with these
Mhm.
students, and he told me this story where he said, "Yeah, I really am enjoying my host family. They're really eco-friendly, so they
Uh-huh.
gave me this small towel, and I'm used to bigger towels."
Yeah.
And so I said, "Well, have you thought about asking them if they have a bigger towel?" And he
Uh-huh.
said, "Well, I don't want to be disrespectful, so
Mhm.
what I do is after I take a shower, I peek my head out the door and I say, 'Ni hao.' And if no one's there, I just run to my
Just right.
room and I turn the fan on." And I was like, It was so sweet, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
it was like coming from such a great place
Yeah.
of like, I want to be respectful,
Right,
but
right.
also I have these needs. And I was
Yeah.
like, it's okay for you to ask. It was so sweet.
Instead of running down the hallway.
Yes. And so I told the story to my counterpart, who's the local coordinator who works with host families primarily. And so she kind of mentioned it to the
To
host
the
family,
host
like,
family.
hey, if you so then the student told me the story a couple of days later.
Mhm.
It's like, you'll never believe it.
Oh, that's so
All
funny.
of my family members, so his host mom, his host dad, his host sister, and host brother
Uh-huh.
came in. They were all holding the
Oh,
towel
jeez.
because they were just so happy to do something for him because he never asked for anything.
Right.
So
Aw.
it's just like little
That's so
moments
sweet.
like that. Yeah, where it's just such a sweet,
Yeah. Yeah,
wholesome
yeah.
experience in
Right.
cultural exchange. A
Yeah.
towel. I mean,
Yeah.
something we don't
So
really even think
simple.
about that much.
Right.
Um,
Oh,
and
I
I'm
love
sure
that
it,
story.
yeah, it was. I'm sure it left an impression on him too. I
Yeah.
wonder if he remembers it, but I
Mhm.
I will never forget
Yeah.
it because it was just so funny and nice, right?
Yeah.
Like it was a
And
nice,
the fact that he didn't want to he didn't want to express that need because he didn't want to offend
yeah,
them and
right,
their whether it was beliefs or,
right.
their the way they run their household,
Yeah.
and
And
that's
these are high
awesome.
school students that I
Yeah.
was working with. So it's a
Mhm.
little bit different than if a college student were
Yeah.
in that position.
Mhm.
We would probably expect them to advocate for
To advocate.
themselves. But
Mhm.
in that scenario, it's like, oh, okay, you're living
Yeah.
with this family for a whole year. So you're
Right.
thinking big picture.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah. And so there were a
Mhm.
lot of things like that.
Mhm.
And I can also remember that there's another student whose host mom was learning English.
Oh,
She had a textbook from like
a long time
a
ago.
while ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so she said, the student told me that he was like, yesterday my host mom said, "What does beefcake mean?"
Oh, jeez. And it's like, how do I explain this?
To my host mom.
Yeah.
Ah,
Oh my gosh.
they had such a good sense of humor
Yeah.
about
Oh,
it,
that's
though.
awesome. I like the story. That's awesome. And again, it goes back to like, just realizing cultural differences and,
Yeah,
but still wanting to be respectful. I think that's the biggest thing is like, you understand there's a difference, but there's um, no one's trying to come off like they're better than
right.
the other party, and they, you just still want to have that mutual respect, but still somehow, like somehow communicate.
Yeah.
Oh, those are great stories. Um, so yeah, thank you for sharing that. I
Sure.
love. See, now I'm always going to remember that story too. um, so going from your college years into your professional life, like what was there sort of a pivotal moment that let you know, like, okay, this is absolutely what I want to do as a career, or what made you pursue this area?
It's a good
Really?
question. It's tough because I think when you work with students, it's definitely ups and downs, right?
Yeah,
When you
yeah.
work with people,
Mhm, mhm,
because the landscape of the people that you're working with is
mhm,
changing.
mhm,
The students that I worked with in my first summer working at the summer camp who
mhm.
gave in their phones are
Yeah,
not the same students that we have today that are
really.
studying abroad
Yeah,
in terms of what their needs are and
right.
what they're looking for out of their experiences. So
Mhm,
I definitely had my ups and downs. I knew that education was important to me,
mhm,
but I approach international education from a linguistics perspective,
mm.
which I think everybody comes at it from a different angle.
Yeah, yeah.
So for me, it was always about language study and whatever work I could do to help students meet language goals was
Mhm,
where I was going.
mhm.
But my first job out of college was actually teaching English in
Oh,
China
wow.
at a middle
Mhm.
school. That was the education ambassador
Okay.
program.
Mhm,
And it was at a public middle school.
mhm.
Let me tell you, middle schoolers, no matter where you are the same. It's
Yeah,
it's
really?
like a very interesting, at least
Yeah.
in my
Yeah,
experience.
yeah.
So it was an unwieldy group of
Uh-huh.
students, but I got to experiment a little bit with teaching and what
Mhm,
I enjoyed about it and what I maybe didn't enjoy about it as
mhm,
much. Of course, it's a different education system.
mhm,
So
mhm.
for a little while, I was going in that direction,
Yeah.
and then I got the work as in Taiwan as an
Mhm,
RD, and
mhm.
I really enjoyed it. And by the end of that, I was looking to go to grad school because I
Mhm.
had seen all of my students learning so much,
Mhm.
and I wanted to go back and learn too.
Yeah.
So that's why I went back.
Mhm.
When I finished my master's degree,
Mhm.
it was a pandemic. So I
Oh, okay.
graduated from actually my cousin's living room because I was
Really?
babysitting
Oh my
for him.
gosh.
So yeah, so it's complicated.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
that's not a great time to enter international education when
Mm.
everything is
Yeah,
shut
because you could
down,
yeah.
especially if your background is Chinese, because
Wow.
that right. So,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
for a little while, I was working for a translation company.
Mhm.
Basically, is like the middleman between the translator and the
Mhm.
client.
Mhm.
And I started an Etsy shop where I was
Wow.
making earrings, and I was
Mhm.
just kind of figuring out
Mhm.
what I wanted to do, and I was casting a wide net.
Mhm.
And I had never heard of the Richard U. Light Fellowship
Oh,
Program, which
wow.
is kind of wild because
Yeah,
of the breadth and scope of what it does.
right.
Um, and I got it through kind of a friend of mine who emailed the posting and said, "Hey, I think this might be a
Yeah.
good fit for you." And
Oh,
so I
wow.
applied,
And the rest is
and the rest
history.
is history. So
That's
I
so
kind of
awesome.
ended up here by accident, but it
Really?
feels like such a good fit in terms of the work that we're doing. And
Yeah.
yeah.
That is so cool. You know, and again, a few days ago, I was talking to someone about the podcast, and I think the question came up about just how do we get guests and how do
Yeah.
and but aside from that, it's one of the interesting things that came to mind was just that all of my guests who have been uh whether they've been with Yale College for years or they started a couple years, it's like we all love what we do. Like we all whatever backgrounds we come from, I think that's what makes Yale College special because we really truly love like the stuff that we do.
Yeah.
Like and I can tell that this is just something that is ingrained in your, like you really truly love language and
Mhm.
it's so awesome because One I think maybe it was the question from your Yale, I'm not sure, but, one of the things that came up was they were asking me, "What do I love about working, here at Yale College?" And I'm like, we have some amazing staff,
Yeah.
like, everyone has, which, just listening to you talk about your background, it's like,
Thank you. Yeah.
yeah, you have an amazing background and you could tell that you love what you do, and then it happened for you to come here by accident, it's like and then depending on what you believe, it's like, "No, it was meant to be."
Right, right. Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
meant to be here. Um,
It's true. I
yeah.
also think I found that people find ways to do the things that they
Yeah,
love
yeah.
after getting here,
Mhm.
which is something that I think is just unique to having resources the way
Right.
that we do, which
Mhm.
I feel fortunate about.
Mhm.
So I just talked to someone actually because they're putting on a production of a South Asian play,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
I was like, "Oh, how did you get involved in this?" And she was like, "I am I was just interested.
Really?
PhD in something totally entirely
Really?
different," and is just doing it and was able to find
Other
some, resources
Mhm.
to pursue this passion.
Right.
And I think that that is also really special about this
Yeah.
place.
That's pretty
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah,
It was
and
kind of
it's
like how you ended up doing this podcast
yeah.
too.
And just thinking about that, it's like I don't, and I've worked in other, like I said, I worked in nonprofits. I did, the corporate side for a while, and I don't think I've ever worked in a place that just supported, like, hey, you want to try this out
Yeah.
and do this and see how it goes.
Yeah.
And that it's pretty cool because you get to experiment, you get to spread your wings a little bit and then on the flip side of that, if it's something that isn't as the outcome may not be what you wanted it to be, but I think what's great about being here is that we get the space to like, okay, it didn't work out the way we thought, but we learned from it, and now
Mhm.
we can do these other things too. And I have to say that that's one of the things I love about working here, and it's just so cool. Like, it's cool to talk to you and hear.
Likewise, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we hadn't met before. I think we met. Let's see. I'm trying to remember how did we kind of connect
It was through Maya.
through Maya,
Yeah,
but I'm trying to remember where were we?
I
Were
think
we
it
at
was at
a?
the Yale College
It
Christmas
was.
or holiday party, yeah.
That's right, you're right,
Yeah.
yeah, and and it's so funny because are you also, in the same building? We're
Yes.
in the same building, but
Yes,
I
but I
haven't
never
seen you.
yeah, I know, that's funny how that
It is
happened.
funny,
Yeah.
so yeah, again, I just I don't know, I find it interesting and also inspiring when I hear about all of these different backgrounds and, like, that you truly like, you love what you do,
Mhm.
um so I'm wondering if you could talk about maybe some of the challenges that you've come across through your work with students, whether it was from your own professional development or also maybe what students are some common things that students face.
Yeah. I think so here specifically, fear of missing out is a
Mm,
huge challenge for
mm-hmm,
us because students are afraid to leave
mm,
Yale. They
okay,
wanna be with their friends, they wanna have the full experience of 4 years. It's really hard to convince a student to study abroad term time.
really,
Yeah. I mean, of course, there are students who come in and they want
they
to, and
want.
honestly, I think Yale does very well because there's aid for international experiences in a way that fewer institutions have.
Wow, okay.
But also, I think fewer students take advantage of that,
Hmm.
than maybe another institution where it
Yeah,
depends, right? But,
right.
yeah, so we see a lot of students who ask us the question, what do people say
Hmm.
about leaving?
Hmm.
Um, and it's one of those things where it's a personal choice, right? You can't tell a student, "I promise you
Yeah,
this will be good for you,"
right, right.
because it might not be really. The
Yeah.
reality of it is that you have to want it, and you
Hmm.
have to want to at least take a little bit of a leap of faith, or
Hmm.
else those isolating, tough
Yeah.
moments are gonna be a lot worse.
Right, right.
And this is something we talk about in study abroad, Yale study abroad a lot.
Mhm,
How do we convince students that going away is also enriching your education and your
mhm,
experience
mhm.
here? Um, and I think that the pandemic also impacted that, right?
Okay.
So, people are either more afraid of going abroad or they feel like, oh, I've been in the US for so long, I want to go abroad.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
it really depends on the students. And we're definitely seeing a lot of people go in the summer.
mhm.
I think term time is tough. So I think people are afraid, or
Really?
our students are afraid.
Mhm,
Yeah, and I think also for us, we see a lot of students who want to do things with other Yale students.
mhm.
Um, and for study abroad, that can be a tough thing because we're
Yeah.
not trying to build Yale abroad.
Mhm,
I mean,
mhm.
there are programs for
Right,
that, but
right.
with Yale instructors and Yale educational
Mhm.
strategies. But for if you're trying to go to a non-Yale program, the hope is that you kind of get away from that and you learn
Yeah.
something new and you're exposed to new perspectives,
Mhm,
educational and otherwise.
mhm.
Um, and I think that's also kind of
Yeah.
one of the challenges, but that's also something that students have to learn on their own, I think.
Mhm,
We can tell them, "Have you considered this other thing? I think it'll be a better fit for you."
mhm.
But to a certain extent, it depends on what their goals are. So if their goals are to be with other Yale students, it's
Mhm.
different than if your goals are to get away.
Ah,
So
interesting.
and everyone has their own reasons, and I think that's why the work that we do is really important because
Mhm,
you do have to get to know a student, figure out what they need. They might
mhm.
not know what they're
Right.
looking for, so you're trying to help them figure that out in
Okay.
order for them to make those decisions.
Wow.
So I think those 2 things.
Yeah.
And then another thing that we're seeing is decision making has become really challenging, and
Mhm,
I wonder if other people have said this. I think, um having so many options is
mhm,
such a blessing, and
mhm.
and they are really fortunate. But I think that there's a lot of anxiety about, is this the right choice? And if I
Yeah.
make this choice, what am I missing out on by not
Mhm.
making this other choice?
Okay.
And that might be true of people in general
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Like that might not be something that's student specific, but I
Mhm,
think there is a lot of anxiety about
mhm.
doing what's right whether that's so that they can get a great job after college
Right.
and pay back loans,
Mhm.
like, I get that,
Yeah.
or because they have parental pressure, external pressure,
Mhm.
or, they wanna succeed and they're not quite sure how to get there.
Mhm.
I think that's kind of a tough thing to watch because you want students to say, "This is my time. This is
Yeah.
my educational experience. This is what I can do with it."
Right.
But how do
Yeah.
we get to that point?
Yeah. Are there, like, and again, kinda going back to their reasons for wanting to study abroad, and like you said, if it's, uh, more of just, "I wanna get away" kind of reason,
Mhm.
but then they're wondering about what they're missing in terms of, like, it sounds like they're worried about the social aspect of college years. Are there, uh like, how do students support each other? Are there, like, groups,
Mm.
like, literally, um I don't wanna call it a support group, but just some type of, um, connection
Yeah.
there so that they still feel like, "Okay, I'm not completely, isolated here, and I have, people to talk to and, who are
Yeah.
going through the same kinda thing." Do they sort of is there something established, or do they create it on their own, or how does that work?
You mean while they go abroad?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, so to a certain extent, they do create it on their own
Really?
because they are meeting other students on their program
Mhm.
that they might not have known on campus,
Mhm. Mhm.
but are going with them. So
Mhm.
for the Light Fellowship, we send large numbers of students to
Really?
almost every one of these programs, so
Mhm.
they find each other
Oh,
immediately.
okay. Okay.
But but we also have groups of students who, after they've come back, talk to students.
Oh,
So
okay.
we have a list of resources for the Light Fellowship Student Advisory Committee.
Mhm.
And we also have on the Study Abroad website, student connect with students who have studied abroad
Mhm.
before.
Mhm.
And I think that actually helps
Yeah.
because what they're worried about is coming back, the transition coming
Really?
back. And well, I mean, it depends on the
Yeah,
student,
yeah.
right? But so I think that that resource has been kind of a cool thing to watch them take advantage of
Mhm. Mhm.
because also the way that they talk to each other. We did kind of an experimental returnee event
Mhm.
this year for the Light Fellowship,
Mhm.
where we had students who had done academic year who had been back for a semester,
Mhm.
talk to students who had just been abroad for that semester were just coming back.
Mhm.
And the way that they talked to each other, we thought, oh, we should keep doing this
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they are talking to each other and they've shared experiences. It's a way to hold on to something that they
Yeah.
had
Mhm.
without forgetting what they
Right.
learned. So,
That's interesting.
yeah.
Because at least, the ones who had already returned, they can share their returned
Yeah.
experience, and
Yeah.
then knowing what to expect, you can
Yeah.
maybe that'll help guide them,
Yeah.
the decision-making process, like you said. Um,
That's the hope.
yeah, we can hope, right?
Yeah.
Um, was there like as you shared some of these awesome stories, was there like a particularly rewarding experience that you've had, while helping students?
So I'm sure there are many.
Right.
It's almost harder to think of those moments
Uh-huh.
because they're so it's like every little thing to me
Yeah,
is a
yeah.
rewarding experience. So, watching a student not be able to read a menu and then
Mhm.
go towards being able to read and order for themselves, like that to
Yeah.
me is like, wow, you did
Yeah.
that.
That's awesome.
Or just sometimes students have um challenges with their host families, like, "Oh,
Mhm.
I can't relate to this," but then they figure out how to open up dialogue, like,
Mhm.
that is also just really special to me. There are a lot
Yeah.
of pieces to it that I think, um, are worth celebrating. So
Mhm.
I don't mean to say it like, "Yeah, of course there are," but
Right,
I can't
right.
be specific. I
Yeah.
just mean really there are
Like
every little thing
every
is
victory.
a success, and
Yeah.
I think that the more we learn to celebrate that about ourselves, the more that we can say, "Okay, I can do anything,"
Yeah, yeah.
which is what I kind of hope people get out of study abroad.
Right. Oh, that's great. Yeah, and that's a great way to put it, like, like, even the smallest, you would think that, like, the simplest accomplishment, like you said, like being able to order a menu, which to me translates to like, okay, you can go to a doctor
Yeah. Yeah.
or, if something were to happen and you
Yeah.
needed to be able to translate during that situation, you'd be able to do that. Like
Yep.
unlike my crossing the border experience,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Um, that's awesome. So now I kind of, as you can see,
Oh,
we've
wow.
already been talking for an hour almost. Um, so now I want to shift to a few questions just about you. Like, how do you balance all of this with? I know that you love dancing and swimming, so and arts and crafts. So, and you mentioned that you had an Etsy store. So, can you maybe tell me a little bit more about the jewelry?
Sure. So, right. So I started an Etsy store.
Hmm.
I have not picked it up since moving here and
Really?
starting the job because so how do you balance? It's a good
Right,
question.
right.
Um, but it was more of an outlet for
Hmm.
me, and art in general
Yeah.
is because when you are focusing on something that's not in your head,
Hmm. Hmm.
tactile
Yeah.
art, it helps me kind of center myself. So that
Right.
was really where it came from. But what I
Awesome.
was finding is that I was making 1,000
Really?
earrings and I just needed to do something with them.
Really?
So I often give them out
Oh,
too,
that's so nice.
just because at this point that's okay with me.
Yeah.
So yeah, so and so the Etsy is literally just clay, is what
Mhm.
it's called.
Okay.
And maybe I'll start it up again
Yeah, yeah.
soon. But really it's kind of a fun way to like focus on something so tiny and
Yeah.
little.
Yeah.
But I haven't done it in a while. Dancing is another
Mhm.
thing that has followed me through my life.
Really?
I was on an Indian folk dance team.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, K through 12.
Uh-huh.
So it was something that my mom put me in
Mhm.
that I ended up really liking,
Mhm.
mostly because I had a group of friends that,
Yeah.
um and we used to compete, and then when I got to college, there's kind of a culture of collegiate Indian dance teams,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Yale has a few too.
Yeah.
And so I was on, the team, and I was
Mhm.
captain for 2 years, and
Oh,
then
that's
I
amazing.
it was awesome,
Yeah.
and I loved it, and I had great friends from it.
Really.
Then I went abroad and, China and Taiwan, you're not really gonna find a whole
Mhm.
team's worth of people to
Mhm.
pursue it. And so I've been trying to find it where I can. And so in grad school, the University of Hawaii has an Asian theater
Mhm.
department.
Mhm.
And the year that I was there, they did a joint production between the Asian and Western theater departments. And it was A Midsummer Night's Bollywood Dream.
Oh, that sounds so cool.
It was a Bollywood interpretation of A
Really?
Midsummer Night's
Oh, I love
Dream.
that.
Yeah, so I was in the ensemble cast of that,
Really?
which is my first experience with theater,
Mhm.
had never done it.
Mhm.
I mean, man, the work that goes into theater productions, I have such respect for it after
Yeah.
having I had respect for it before, but really after having been at rehearsal every day in
Right.
grad school, I
A
really,
new
really
appreciation.
appreciate it. And so yeah, so that's kind of the last like big foray I had into it,
Mhm.
but I am looking to get involved in Connecticut. So
Oh, nice.
hopefully I can find some folks. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah, I would love so coming from so my I guess pastime slash whatever I did to sort of I don't know make a little money during the pandemic.
Yeah.
I love photography, and
Oh,
so
cool.
what was interesting is I had lots of clients who were of Indian descent, so we know like celebrations
Yeah.
and dinners and weddings and so I love capturing it was just so vibrant and
Yeah.
colorful and festive. It was beautiful and so when you go back to dancing, let me know so I can take
Oh,
photos.
yeah, sure. That's a great offer. I will let you know.
Yeah, yeah, that's so neat. So now, as we're coming up on our hour, I'm wondering if you could, I don't know, are there some future goals or projects that you're excited about coming anytime soon or maybe in the next couple years?
Work
Or
related
yeah,
or
or work
otherwise?
or yeah,
No,
or
I mean,
otherwise.
work related, I think I have a lot of ambitions in terms of assessment. This
Mhm.
is such an like boring answer, um, but I think it's important for us sitting where we are
Mhm.
to recognize the privilege of having the resources that we
Yeah,
have, right?
yeah.
And for this, within the context of the Richard E. Light Fellowship,
Mhm.
there really isn't an institution that's sending this many students to this breadth of programs
Mm,
in East Asia,
really?
to my knowledge, except us.
Mhm.
And so we have this, I think that we have a responsibility to share the things that we've learned so that other institutions can benefit from that, not just
Yeah.
us. And so one of the things that I'd like to do is kind of help. I have this kind of pipe dream
Yeah.
plan to figure out kind of a bigger project on what type of student fits in the best in this
Mm.
type of program and what
Mhm.
level makes the most growth, and a very large assessment both in language scale but also in personal growth, which
Mhm.
it's kind of tough to measure
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
um, so that we can also help advisors, because the reality of the matter is that at Yale, I lived in China, Taiwan. Maya has lived in Japan. We have a lot of knowledge about East Asia, and we have a lot of experience
Mhm.
in a way that a lot of institutions don't. So their study
Mm.
abroad advisor, there might be one study abroad advisor at the
Mhm.
institution.
Mhm.
Usually it's not someone who's an Asia specialist, because
Mhm.
most institutions send more students to Western Europe than
Oh,
other
interesting.
places, are us included, right?
Mhm.
So I think, to me, part of the work is saying, how can we use what we have available to us to
Mhm.
make a greater impact, a greater
Yeah.
positive impact. So that's kind of the
The
biggest thing
dream,
that
right?
I have on my mind. But also
Mhm.
we have a lot of aspirations for alumni work.
Mhm.
So how to get students who have gone, who have maybe moved on. Maybe they don't do anything related to East Asia, but
Mhm.
the skill set that they learned,
Right.
like what we've been talking about,
Yeah.
empathy and being able to communicate even
Right.
without a specific language set, a
Mhm.
skill set. I think those things coming back and inspiring the students that we have on campus right now, especially
Mhm.
those students who had high school or middle school during the pandemic,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that really makes a big difference. So those are two things
Awesome.
that I have on my mind.
Oh, that's amazing. And so I'm curious if in those two dreams, right? Do you find or have you found ways that that kind of carries over into like staff development
Mm,
or how do we learn from that experience
yeah,
too, like even if obviously staff aren't studying abroad,
right.
but are there things that we could learn from
Yeah.
the student experiences that would be great takeaways for us?
Yeah. It's a good question.
Mm.
Within the context of Yale, I feel like what we are doing right now,
Mhm.
talking to each other across offices, we have
Mhm.
no reason
Yeah.
to talk, but
Yeah.
other than just because we are talking.
Yeah.
I think that is emulating what they are doing, right?
Wow.
Going out of your comfort zone to say, "Hey,
Mhm.
what's your story?
Yeah.
Let's be friends."
Right, right.
I think that that is something that I think more of us should be doing. And it's hard
Wow.
for me too, right? Like,
Yeah.
we are all busy with our own things. It's hard to
Yeah.
make time. I've been involved with the Asian network at Yale, which is
Mhm.
one of the affinity groups,
Right.
and that has been just a great resource for me to just talk to anyone who's
Mhm.
not doing the work that I do.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because talking to someone who doesn't see the work that you do in the same way that you see it
Mm.
helps you do your job, and
Yeah.
also helps you just be a better, more open-minded
Yeah.
person.
So true.
And I think within the context, it also helps us with our students, right? Because if you're talking to someone who has a different life experience than you
Mhm.
do, and then you meet a student who might have that similar life experience, then
Mhm.
you have learned perspective from
Yeah.
someone that
Right.
you can help, you can use to help them.
Right.
So I think being brave enough
Mhm.
to go out of your comfort zone
Mhm.
should be something that we kind of universally aspire to.
Yeah.
And I think that students studying abroad kind of remind me to do that every day.
That's awesome. That was perfect. I love that, and it's so true because like I shared with you earlier, just this experience, it took me out of my little IT zone,
Yeah.
and I approach my job differently, just talking to people and
Yeah.
getting to know people. It's one of the things I think uh it changes how I interact with
Hmm.
staff.
Right.
Um, a lot of, folks who met me years ago, I might have thought I would, and I am. I can be shy or introverted, and I always say that in all my episodes. Like, yeah, I kind of kept to myself. I do that, I
Uh-huh.
just do my IT stuff. I know that stuff. I know I do it. Um, but I feel like I missed a lot
Hmm.
without connecting
Yeah.
with people,
Yeah.
and this, and just being able to talk to you, and it's like, okay, now I sort of have this visual of like, okay, if you were to reach out to me for some
Right.
sort of IT help, I have a vision of this is what this is what Kripa's job is like, and
Right.
how she serves students, and how do I help,
Right.
how do I help you serve the students, and now I just have a different perspective, and
Yeah.
and not just that, it's like, okay, now I feel like I know you, a little better, and
Yeah.
we can just communicate on a different level, and um
It also,
yeah.
I think when you make friends across campus, this place becomes a friendlier
Yeah,
place.
it really does.
And I think it's really hard to start here. And just thinking back, because I started remotely, I think it's
Yeah, I
hard
can't even
to.
imagine how that was.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting, but
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think it's hard to start here and everyone already knows each other, and you feel like it's hard to get your foot in the door. It's
Right.
also doing this, I hope there are people who are listening who maybe don't know us very well who
Yeah.
might say, "Hey, I listened to your
Right.
podcast," which is how I
Yeah.
I felt like I already knew you
Oh,
because
really?
I
That's
I
awesome.
heard some of your episodes. But
That's so
see, you
cool.
are such a good interviewer and you
Oh,
have such a
geez.
great
Thank
podcast
you.
voice. I was like, "Wow,
Thank
I
you.
could listen to Darice all day."
I appreciate that so much, and it's so and I'm totally not, like, yes, I have a podcast. But, a few people have said this to me, and I was like, "Really?" Like, not something I try to do, or
Right.
and I appreciate that, because it's like, wow, I never thought of myself that way.
Yeah.
I really didn't, and even, hearing it, I you can't tell I'm blushing, but I'm blushing,
Yeah.
because it's yeah, I when I listen to the recordings, I'm kind of like,
I know, you
"La,
hate
la, la."
your
I
own.
listen to the other person, but I'm like,
Yeah.
"I don't wanna listen to myself." Um, but thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you
So
for having me. This has been
yeah,
so fun. I could continue to
I
talk to you
know,
all
I
day,
would
I'm
love to
sure.
talk more about your travels and everything, because I think, you know, for me in college, I feel like that, looking back in my younger years, I wish I traveled more,
Uh-huh.
because, like you said, it gives you a different perspective,
Yeah.
even though some students may feel like they missed out on something, but I just think, as you become, an adult, and, living independently and doing all these things, it's like, I feel like once you've done that, once you've studied abroad, you could do like you said, you could do
Yeah.
anything. If
Yeah.
you can live in a foreign country and take care of yourself and advocate for yourself, I mean, that's amazing. And I wish I did that. I didn't, but
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think that's just so cool, and for me, I think the fear,
Mhm.
that's what,
Yeah.
held me back from even thinking like, "Is this
Yeah.
a possibility?"
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
so that's awesome. Before we end, of course, I wanna find out, like, looking back on your journey, because we talked about all these things. Is
Right.
there something that you're, like, super proud of accomplishing over all the years?
You know, so like I said, I'm Indian American. C came from a community that could not possibly fathom how you
Mm.
could be a Chinese major.
Really?
I mean, really. And it wasn't because people were malicious or anything. It was just because it wasn't something they were exposed to, right?
Really?
My parents they had, and a lot of the people in their lives had
Mhm,
these options:
mhm,
doctor, engineer, lawyer.
mhm, mhm.
And I think that it really
It was
scared my
different,
parents
yeah.
when I when I didn't go down that route.
Mhm.
So, I think that the thing that I'm most proud of is being able to expose my community to
Mm.
a bigger world,
Yeah.
because even though they are like, a lot of people I grew up with came from, or my parents' friends came from India, and they
Mhm.
came across an ocean, and
Mhm.
but the world that they were living in still was defined by these rules, like
Yeah.
success is equal to XYZ.
Mhm.
And I'm proud that I could be a part of
Yeah.
kind of opening minds a little bit, and I have a lot of family members who have also supported me in that,
That's
and
awesome.
inspired me in that.
Right.
So I think that's the thing, that there's not a tangible, like,
Yeah.
deliverable that I could
Right.
say, but having a conversation where, someone once asked me, like, "Are you sure you don't wanna be an engineer or a
Yeah.
lawyer?" To kind of like, "What do you do
Mhm.
now? And tell me
Mhm.
about that. I wanna learn
Mhm.
about that." I think that those are such precious moments that you
Yeah.
can't really define.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that, and it's, like you said, I mean, it sounds like they even though they were kind of like, "I don't know about this, but we're gonna
Yeah.
support you in it." Um, but I love that in your experience and your journey, and then it's like, yeah, this is your career, and
Somehow.
yeah, and it's awesome, to be able to share that with others, and who knows who you've
Yeah.
influenced, and maybe they'll pursue the same thing
Yeah.
later on, and
And this is I know we're running out of
yeah,
time,
yeah, that's
but,
okay.
I just so my partner's family is from Austria,
Mhm.
and they
Wow.
speak German at
Wow,
home,
okay.
which is not a language I know,
Yeah, yeah.
but I feel like my experiences have also helped me in that too.
Wow.
So I feel like there's also just so much to say about language and culture that isn't defined by your career too,
Mhm.
right? Like just by getting to know people in your
Yeah.
life, um and learning from them, and
Right.
being able to open yourself up in that way. I
Mhm.
think that, like, that is also such a special
It
piece. It's not
is.
just about your career or about
Yeah.
what you can say you've achieved or what is award nominatable.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the things that are little in life
Yeah,
that you can
and
learn about someone, the
connections.
stories.
Yeah,
Yeah.
stories, connections, and I love that I love that you shared that because it's so true because, at the end of the day, it's like, I as morbid as it sounds, I'm always like, "Okay, if I'm gone tomorrow, what will people remember about
Yeah.
me? Like, are
Yeah.
they gonna think, 'Oh, she did great IT stuff,' you know?" Are they gonna think of that, or will they think I
I
don't
mean, I'm
know.
sure they would, but I take your
Yeah.
point. Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's
Yeah.
more to life
There's
than
more,
just
yeah, there's so
work.
much more to
Yeah,
life. There's more, connections and getting like I said, just doing this. I've really enjoyed getting to know how
yeah,
people grow, how everyone grew up and because I feel like, okay, all of these experiences influenced who we are today
yeah,
to me that's fascinating because
yeah,
we all have different experiences, but there's that common thread of why
yeah,
why we are the way we are or what we value and how we bring that into our work.
yeah,
And then like, okay, we're here at Yale. Like how are we influencing students?
yeah, yeah,
Which to me is I don't know, I find it fascinating because it's like, yeah, that's what has made, Yale what it is. And,
right.
you know, um
Yeah, I think it's building a more empathetic workplace,
yeah,
which hopefully builds a more empathetic student experience.
yes, yes.
That's my hope.
I hope, and it's so funny, I mentioned, when I had Maya
Yeah,
on the podcast, and I said, "Yeah," I said, "Isn't it kinda cool that when you're thinking you're influencing students who knows what they're going to go out into the
yeah.
world and what they're going to do?" And she was like, "I don't think that far." But it is kind of to me, that's what's amazing about it. It's like, you don't know what they're going to do in the
Yeah,
world, and
yeah,
here we are influencing them because of how we
yeah,
were raised or our experience. I don't know. I'm kind of one of those people. I find the
yeah.
connections and the threads.
I think it's easier. Yeah, I think, we're hoping that it's
Yeah,
positive
yeah. We're
influence.
hoping. Yeah, we're hoping it's a positive experience, right? Exactly. Like we
Yeah.
hope it's a good thing. But even my second guest ever, Anita Sharif Hyder.
Uh-huh.
She mentioned. her hospitality,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah,
wanting
right.
to just have, even if it's a very brief connection with someone,
Yep.
that she wants to um, um, bring that into that connection. So hopefully, maybe there's something about it that
Yeah,
resonates later on, that somehow you influence that person,
right.
and that's how I look at it. Like,
Yeah.
even if it's a negative situation, that maybe there's some sort of takeaway
Yeah. Yeah.
that.
I think about this a lot because I had a lot of great teachers,
Mhm.
and I might not remember every
Yeah.
interaction I had, but I know that
Mhm.
there was something that they did or said that impacted who I am.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah, I think it's true. And I
yeah.
think when we live in a world where we can say, "I don't really remember exactly this conversation, but I know that I have
Something.
this fondness for what
Yeah,
you did for me."
right.
I think that it's a good
It's a
thing.
good
It can't
thing,
hurt.
yeah, it can't hurt at all. Um, okay, my last question, because of course I have a few, but let's see. Thinking about all of these things that you've done, so far, I if you had to give advice to your younger self, what would that be?
So, sometimes I look back at my younger self and I think, how did you have the confidence to do
Mm,
the things that, because I don't think I still have that.
really?
I think that, after you live a little bit, you're like
Mhm.
a little bit more afraid of
Yeah,
what you
yeah,
can lose
when
or,
you realize, like.
yeah, the full scope of the world. So I almost think my advice
Mhm.
would be like, stay a little fearless
Really?
in some of the things that you do, because
Mhm,
I think that that protects you from making choices because other people want you
mhm,
to, or
mhm.
from doing things because you think you should.
Yeah.
Like, I think so, yeah, that's one piece, and then the other piece is, and this is something that I feel like I've learned throughout, is just to listen to your own voice, which is kind of along the
Mm,
same lines. Like, I think so I think a lot of us grow up in communities where we wanna make sure that we're respecting the people around us. I grew up in
mhm,
a community where I wanted to respect my parents, and
mhm, mhm.
I'm here and I wanna respect sometimes the
Yeah, yeah.
institution
Right.
and the rules, and I
Mhm,
think that learning kind of what you feel okay with, what is your ethical, moral
mhm,
responsibility to the life that you live,
mhm.
I think is something that helps guide your decision making.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say to my younger self. I don't know that I would have
Mhm.
understood it
Still,
the
yeah.
way that I understand it now, but
Yeah. Like following your gut.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds so simple, right?
Right.
But I think a
But it's
lot of
tough.
people, well, that, and it's also hard to know what your gut feeling
Yeah.
is when you're
Right.
young and you're influenced by so many things.
Yeah.
And I think I have so much sympathy for kids now because they have so much more exposure to social media
Yes.
and
Oh,
than I did, and
right.
I had some exposure.
Yeah.
And so I think being able to find your own voice and what you really want in a
Mhm.
time where you are inundated with
Mhm.
other people's ideas
Mhm.
is such a skill,
Yeah.
and I wish that for all young people.
Oh, that's an amazing note to end on. Wow,
I feel like I like unleashed my
yeah,
idealist self.
yes. This is awesome, and I'm so glad. It was so awesome to get to know you today.
Likewise.
Um,
I feel like we could have talked for hours,
yeah,
but
we really could, because
yeah.
I really love to hear about, and again, it just goes back to, like, oh, I wish I did this,
Yeah,
years
yeah.
ago. So
Yeah.
I love to hear about traveling and your experiences. But of course, we have to end.
Yeah, we'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, but we should do. We're in the same building. We should
Yeah,
go.
yeah, we
We should
should
go to
chat.
lunch or something.
Yeah.
So Kripa, thank you so much
Thank you, Darice.
for joining me today, and just sharing your stories. I found them fascinating, but also, I hope that our listeners kind of hear, they hear your story, and like I said, maybe it'll influence them to,
Yeah.
oh, let me, step outside of my comfort zone, and maybe I'll try
Yeah.
try this new thing, or um, do an immersive program, or
Yeah. Would
you
love
know.
to chat about
Yeah, that's so amazing.
it.
And I'm like, oh, that would be interesting, because, you know, and I know we're supposed to end, but, I'm thinking back to when I worked for this nonprofit, and, um, we were in immersive situations, and it's like, yeah, once we, as I was there, like a few, a couple weeks or something like that. But, by the time I got
Yeah.
to like the week and a half, I was like, oh yeah, I remember I can actually speak this language.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
starts to come back to me.
Yeah.
And then it was time to go,
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but it would be cool to have, I don't know, just some sort of, you know
So,
what I mean?
yeah, well, I had this idea because a friend of mine just got engaged and
Mhm.
her fiance's parents only speak Spanish.
Mhm.
And so she doesn't speak Spanish. She's trying to learn. She took French in school.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I was like, what if we just did like a weekend immersion
Yeah,
where,
yeah. Yeah,
you
like
just
a
like
brief,
come up, we'll just do like a whole weekend in
Yeah.
Spanish. So I think that there are kind of fun ways
Yeah.
that are informal to do
Right.
that.
That
I
would
would love
actually,
to just like kind of do that as a side project. It'd be
yeah.
fun.
Because I was like, oh, that would be an interesting staff thing, like to have, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
okay, this is a meeting that purely we're only doing it in this language. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and we have to. I mean, I think it would be a great staff exercise to like, okay, you don't know this language, but you have to figure out how to, I don't know, communicate XYZ.
Yeah.
And I,
I'm just nerding
yeah.
out over here because I would love to do that. It would be so
I
much
think that
fun.
would be a really interesting like exercise. We should probably talk and figure out how we
Yeah.
can have some sort of,
I'm sure there is a linguist somewhere who would
yeah,
love to do the research on
that would
like
be
use that as a case study too.
that would be so cool. Like to literally have to have a staff meeting in a different,
Yeah. Well, I feel like staff meetings are hard depending
that would be
on what
hard. Yeah.
level you
Right,
are
right.
at, but like definitely because I'm thinking back to some of the activities we used to do.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, there's definitely room
Yeah.
for some fun kind of language learning
Right.
experiences.
And then we just have to have food and
Yeah, that's
people
how
will
you get
come,
people
right?
there.
We should talk. We should do something like that. I love that idea because I would love, even for me, I would love to revisit, Spanish, and
Yeah.
I took it for years, and
Yeah.
I feel like I should know some basic stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah.
count me in, but we should definitely do something like that. So to be continued.
To be continued. Yeah, exactly.
So again, Kripa, it was such a pleasure just getting to know you today, and
Me too.
thank you so much for agreeing to do the podcast, and
Yeah.
again, I hope our listeners have take all those things away, and now that they can see you and see you in the passing, maybe
Yeah.
they'll
Come chat with me.
chat with you about language. And I mean, I honestly, I think that would be a really cool exercise. um and yeah, so I'm going to end it on that because you brought up some great points, and just in terms of, even if there's a language barrier, that there are other ways that we can connect. And I just hope staff, or any of our listeners, remember that,
Yeah.
and that it's important. It's important, right?
Yeah.
A connection is important. So thank you,
Thank you.
and I'm going to end it now. And you know, I hope that we can still collaborate
Sounds
somehow.
great. Sounds
Awesome,
great.
awesome. Thank you, Kripa.